My name is Eleanor Thompson, and I'm 59 years old. For nearly 6 decades, I've lived like a quiet shadow, stitching together the lives of others, hiding behind a curtain of modesty. I never imagined that at the twilight of my years, I would be pierced not by a nagging ache in my body, but by the icy disdain that slipped from the lips of my only son. It all began on an unremarkable day. Ethan Bennett, my own flesh and blood, called to announce the wedding date. Joy overwhelmed me, I won't deny it. I dreamed that this was the moment when all my sacrifices, sleepless nights, every stitch I sewed to earn a piece of bread for his table, would be rewarded. But just one sentence brought down an icy squall on me. Mom, don't bother with a fancy outfit. The wedding will be very elegant, and we don't want anything to stand out. I froze, as if stunned. It took me a few seconds to grasp the meaning of those words. What does anything out of place mean? I am the mother of the groom. I expected at least a drop of respect, but instead received a humiliating suggestion, veiled in polite form. I was delicately told that my creations were best left at home, so as not to disrupt the harmony of the perfectly planned wedding photos, of course, without me. A lump rose in my throat, but forcing a smile into the phone, I assured them that I understood everything and that they shouldn't worry about anything. I hastily hung up, fearing that the treacherous tremor in my voice would betray me. The night was sleepless. I sat in front of the mirror, staring at my hands, marked with the traces of time, needle pricks, calluses from sewing, hands that had given them everything, and which, as it turned out, were not good enough for their wedding. Morning greeted me with swollen eyes, but I held my back straight. I made coffee, as usual, but couldn't take a sip. The heaviness in my chest wouldn't let go, neither water nor deep breaths helped. I tried to convince myself that perhaps I had misunderstood, that Ethan Bennett simply wanted to save me from unnecessary trouble, but my heart told me otherwise. When photos from the pre-wedding photoshoot appeared on social media, I realized the full extent of what was happening. They, radiant in evening attire, smiled under chandeliers and in velvet interiors, and I wasn't there. My son, like a prince, in a custom-tailored suit. The bride, dazzling in her form-fitting white dress, looked like she had stepped off the cover of a glossy magazine. Her whole family, a perfect picture, where every element blended seamlessly with the other. And me? I was behind the scenes. I wasn't even notified about the photoshoot. And that's when it dawned on me, it wasn't about the outfit. The problem lay deeper, in me myself, in my existence, in my past life, in my origins. Perhaps they were afraid of awkward questions about my work, worried that I would be seen in one of my dresses, and someone would decide that I didn't meet their standards. The pain pierced me not because of the missed photo shoot, but from the realization of how easily they had erased me from their lives, as if I had no right to be part of their story. I remember turning off my phone and hiding it in a drawer. Getting up, I went to the closet and took out a dusty box that I had carefully kept for many years. Inside lay a dress that I had started sewing as soon as Ethan Bennett announced his engagement. France fabric, double hand stitches, everything was done with special love and care. I sat down on the bed, laid the dress on my lap, and for the first time in a long time, I let out the tears that were suffocating me from the inside. Wedding week crept up unnoticed, faster than I expected. Not a single call, not a warm reminder, not even a paper invitation, just a cold number, as if they were doing me a huge favor. I, of course, confirmed my attendance, because despite everything, hope flickered in my soul. I believed that my appearance might touch the strings of their hearts. How wrong I was. On the day of the celebration, I woke up with the first rays of the sun. I carefully styled my hair, applied light makeup, and put on that very dress, sewn by my own hands. Not to prove anything, but because only in it did I feel like myself, real. I arrived at the banquet hall in advance, trying to avoid unnecessary glances, unnecessary fuss. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, the noise of conversations began to subside, and glances, like sharp daggers, pierced me through. One of the bridesmaids, whose name immediately flew out of my head, approached me with a strained, unnatural smile. "Eleanor Thompson, how nice that you could come. Could you escort me for a minute?" she sang in a falsely cheerful voice. And, taking me by the arm, led me to a lonely table in the very corner, near the service exit. "It will be quieter here for you," she said with sugary sweetness. Quieter, a euphemism for, here no one will see you, you won't spoil the photos and you won't disrupt the ceremony. I just nodded silently, feeling a lump of resentment rising to my throat. Silently sinking onto the chair, I swallowed my pride like bitter poison. Time dragged on agonizingly slowly. I watched as my son, Ethan Bennett, casually moved through the hall, greeting guests with a radiant smile, clinking glasses. But he didn't approach me. Not a single glance in my direction. As if I were just another guest, a random passerby, an incorporeal shadow. It was in that moment that the realization pierced me: this place, this day, this celebration, it wasn't for me. I had dedicated my entire life to him, but in this glittering hall, bathed in lights and flowers, there was no place for me. I don't know how I endured the entire ceremony, resisting the urge to jump up and run away. I remained seated at that table, as if marked with a sign of shame, with a straight back and wide-open eyes, desperately suppressing the tears that threatened to erupt. I focused my gaze on the table decorations, on the impeccable magazine-worthy composition, on the piano whose keys remained untouched. Everything around me was perfect, except for my place in this story. During the toast, the bride's family was invited to the stage. Parents, grandparents, even an aunt who had flown in from abroad, they all shared warm words and tender embraces. In the moment when I timidly hoped to hear my name, expecting Ethan Bennett to invite me to express gratitude, even in a short phrase, I was cruelly mistaken. Not a single word, not a grateful glance, not a quiet "thank you, Mom." It was as if I didn't exist in his world. Soon, a woman approached me with the saccharine smile of a professional organizer, exuding an affected politeness that concealed a desire to get rid of an unwanted guest as quickly as possible. "Excuse me, would you mind coming with me? Olivia Rodriguez, the mother of the bride, would like to free up this table for an important group of businessmen who have just arrived." Without ceremony, like an old coat rack, I was moved to a far corner of the hall, near the kitchen, where the air was thick with the smell of grease, and the slamming doors shook the walls. No one stood up for me. In that moment, something broke inside. Not just sadness, no. It was something else, cold, crystal clear, all-consuming. I knew that I wasn't valued, but for the first time, I realized that I was no longer willing to endure it. That evening, while they danced and laughed under the bright lights, I got up, took my purse, and, without looking back, left the celebration. They didn't yet know that it was the last day they would see me as the submissive woman they had so diligently cultivated. I returned home with aching feet and a broken heart. I sank into the chair in front of my sewing machine, a faithful worker, my companion for over 30 years. With my fingertips, I gently traced its cool metal, as if greeting an old friend who understood me without words. This machine, a witness to my tears, a keeper of my hopes, a silent participant in every sleepless night. I started sewing when Ethan Bennett was barely 4 years old. My husband left suddenly, leaving me alone, with a sick child in my arms, without an education, without family, without anyone's support. I was offered work as a cleaner, but I knew that my hands were capable of more. I started with hemming skirts, then moved on to entire dresses, and soon I was sewing custom orders for a boutique in the city center, working at night to meet deadlines. The money I earned was barely enough to pay for housing, Ethan's education, and meager food. But I never complained. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, Ethan Bennett would have a better life. I sent him to a private school, even though I wore shoes until they had holes in them. I paid for his internship abroad, selling my wedding ring, a symbol of my past, happy life. I poured my heart and soul into giving him a surname that sounded proud, while my own faded into oblivion. And what were all these sacrifices for? To be hidden at his wedding, as if I were a shameful secret. To be moved from place to place, as if I were blocking the light. That night, sitting in front of the sewing machine, I stitched, not realizing what I was doing. I simply guided the fabric under the needle, as if sewing up a bleeding wound. An old, deep wound that I no longer wanted to hide. Something stirred within me that I didn't even know existed, a sense of self-worth. After the wedding, the days dragged on in a strange numbness. Not a call, not a message, not even a formal, "How are you, Mom?" As if I didn't exist at all. And I didn't try to remind them of myself, not because it didn't hurt, but because something inside me no longer wanted to humiliate myself by begging for love. Silently, I began to gather my things. There weren't many. A few boxes of thread, scraps of fabric, faded photographs, and a worn notebook with order records. I didn't tell anyone about my departure. I simply closed my small workshop, without warning a single soul. I returned the keys to the rented premises where I had spent so many years, and left the refrigerator completely empty. I left this world the same way I entered it, with only what I was wearing and my hands burning with the desire to start a new life. I didn't have a specific goal, just a direction I had previously ignored. In an old wooden box, I kept a letter signed by the only person who ever treated me with genuine respect, Miss Abigail Sterling. For over 15 years, I served as her personal seamstress. An elegant, demanding, but always fair woman. After her passing, I found an envelope with my name on it. Fear of unfulfilled hopes kept me from opening it. But now, with no one waiting for me anywhere, I decided to. Inside was a letter written in elegant handwriting with blue ink and a notarized document. She had left me property. In my name. And it wasn't just any property. It was a house in a prestigious neighborhood, a bank account with a substantial sum, and a clear note, "Because family is chosen, and you have become more than just an employee to me." I froze, clutching the letter to my chest. For the first time in years, I felt fate itself whispering to me, "Now it's your turn." I arrived at my new home with an old suitcase, a carefully folded wedding dress, and the letter from Miss Abigail Sterling tucked away in my purse. Tears of gratitude welled up in my eyes, and my heart overflowed with hope. The house exuded grandeur, high ceilings, mirrored floors, and sunlight streaming through the enormous windows seemed to penetrate my very soul. The air was filled with the scent of expensive wood, freshness, and tranquility. I wandered through the rooms as if enchanted. For the first time in my life, I had a place where no one looked at me with disdain. For the first few days, I tried not to disturb the silence. I just slept, ate in silence, and stood by the window for long periods with a cup of scalding tea, watching the world go by. It felt strange, as if I were a guest in someone else's life. But gradually, something began to change inside me. One day, I mustered the courage to enter the walk-in closet. It was overflowing with exquisite outfits, many of which still had tags on them. Ms. Abigail Sterling had impeccable taste, and it seemed that all the clothes were custom-made. I tried on a silk set in a deep wine color and, for the first time in years, looked in the mirror without shame. There was no exhausted seamstress with calloused hands. There was no mother who was ignored and rejected. I saw a woman, whole, with a calm face and a firm, determined gaze. A woman who had been treated cruelly by her closest relatives but had not broken. I touched my reflection and smiled faintly. And I vowed to myself, that spark in my eyes would never go out again, not because of anyone. That same day, with trembling fingers, I dialed the number of the banquet hall where the wedding had once taken place. "Who is the owner?" I blurted into the phone. "The property is for sale," they replied. And, as if obeying a sudden impulse, I uttered the words that would change my life, "I want to buy it." The secretary went silent, clearly stunned. Then, after an awkward pause, I was connected to the real estate agent. Hanging up the phone, I looked in the mirror again. Now they will see me, I thought. But this time on my terms. The meeting to view the hall was scheduled for exactly 1 week later. I arrived on time, dressed in one of Ms. Abigail Sterling's strict suits. My hair was neatly styled, and I wore high heels that I hadn't worn in ages. The real estate agent greeted me with a look that mixed curiosity and skepticism. I'm sure he thought I had the wrong address. But as soon as I showed him the certified check, his tone changed instantly. The hall looked the same as it did on the wedding day, only now it was empty, quiet, devoid of flowers and fake laughter. I slowly walked through the lobby, then into the banquet area, until I reached that very table in the corner where I had once been hidden. I touched the back of the chair, and a sharp, stabbing pain pierced my chest. But I immediately let it go. This place no longer belonged to me as an unhealed wound. Now it belonged to me as the owner. I signed the documents, my hand did not tremble. I paid the entire amount to the last cent, without asking for a discount or concession. I didn't need favors, I wanted them to see that I could do it. The agent handed me the keys, thanked me, and left, unaware that he had just become a tiny detail in a story that was much deeper than a banal real estate deal. That same day, I contacted a renovation crew. My request was clear: to turn this place into an exclusive boutique event center with a flair for high fashion. Ivory-colored walls, new curtains, soft, diffused light, nothing flashy, but with a pronounced personality. And most importantly, I emphasized this especially, that no one should ever dare to sit next to the kitchen again. 3 months flew by in the blink of an eye. The venue turned out exactly as I had imagined it, impeccable, restrained, filled with details that whispered of elegance, without needing loud pronouncements. I didn't hang my photographs or arrange noisy presentations. I simply hired a competent booking agency and allowed the place to speak for itself. And it spoke. Orders flowed like a river, exquisite, intimate celebrations for select, refined connoisseurs of luxury. I remember the first time I entered the hall after the transformation, and I was almost paralyzed. Stopping in the very center, I closed my eyes and greedily inhaled the air of change. No more gloomy shadows, prickly corners, or sinister tables that remembered slaps. This was my kingdom, my fortress, built by the invisible hand of my mother, not inherited from a humble seamstress. Mine, and no one knew about it. A week later, I received a call from the agency. A young couple wanted to book the hall for a welcome party and personally inspect the site. Their names were kept secret until the last moment. And then, I saw them, Ethan Bennett and Olivia Rodriguez. My heart skipped a beat. My son and his wife. A long, agonizing pause. I could refuse, cancel everything, but something inside resisted. No, I decided they had to see me. Not the one who toiled over buttons at night, not the one who waited timidly in the corner, dreaming of hugging her son. They would see the real me. A woman who needs neither an invitation nor permission, and certainly not forgiveness. They begged for a place in my life, and I generously allowed them to enter. And so, the day of the meeting arrived. Like a shadow, I watched them from my office with tinted glass, which offered a direct view of the main hall. They craved communication only with the manager, avoiding a meeting with the owner, and I preferred to remain in the shadows. I didn't need any introductions. Pride doesn't shout about itself, it declares itself without unnecessary words. They entered as always. Olivia Rodriguez, dressed in a form-fitting dress, with a designer handbag hanging from her arm like a conquered trophy. Behind her trailed Ethan Bennett, with the expression of a man being dragged to his execution. I was struck by his exhaustion. He looked older than I remembered and somehow empty. They sat down in front of the coordinator and began to ask questions, express complaints, and discuss everything with the air of people to whom the world owes something. Olivia Rodriguez, not mincing words, stated, "We want something exclusive, elegant, but by no means vulgar. So that the decor screams high class. Do you understand me? Nothing that could even remotely resemble cheap diners." As she spoke these words, a barely noticeable, cunning smile flashed across her face. I understood perfectly what she meant. In her world, stinginess and pettiness had a specific embodiment, and for many years, that embodiment was me. They asked to see the kitchen, the individual suites, the photo shoot area. In every corner, they nodded approvingly, wrote something in their notebooks, and asked questions designed to emphasize their importance. I watched them silently, without uttering a word. They were completely delighted with the place, they were eager to book it immediately. "This place has absolutely everything we were looking for," Olivia Rodriguez said, unaware that the place that aroused such delight in her was created by the very woman she had once kicked out of the table like unwanted trash. At the end of the visit, they left a business card with their phone number. They insisted that the owner contact them personally. The coordinator handed me the card, looking at me questioningly. "Do you want to call them back?" I stared at it for a few seconds, then tore the card in half abruptly. "No, they will return. Not because I will look for them, but because fate itself will take care of putting everything in its place. So that they finally realize their true place." A couple of days later, I received a call from the reception. Olivia Rodriguez, apparently, insisted on a personal conversation with the owner. "Do you want to meet with her before signing the contract?" the question sounded. I hesitated for only a moment. I was ready to refuse, but suddenly something inside me purred with satisfaction. "Of course, I'll receive her," I replied with a barely noticeable smile. I introduced myself simply as Eleanor Thompson, no surnames, no positions, no titles. I dressed restrainedly, but with impeccable taste. When she entered, it took her several long seconds to recognize me. Surprise flashed across her face instantly, like a match. The smile withered immediately, like a plucked flower. Her shoulders tensed, as if before a blow. Ethan Bennett, who followed her, froze in place. The only thing he could utter was, "Mom, I didn't know you worked here." "I don't work here, I am the owner," I replied, maintaining an even tone, without the slightest hint of triumph. A long, drawn-out silence ensued. "It seemed you could touch it." She swallowed hard, plastered on a fake, silly smile, and stammered, "So nice to see you, Eleanor Thompson." Hypocrisy, thickly laced with expensive perfume. I offered them something to drink. Gave them a brief tour, showcasing the new menus, halls, and VIP areas. I spoke to them with complete professionalism, not a trace of malice in my voice, but with a memory frozen in my eyes. Olivia Rodriguez tried her best to hold it together, but her trembling hands betrayed her nervousness. Ethan Bennett remained silent, as if his tongue had been cut out. At the end of the tour, they announced their desire to book a date, but first, as Olivia timidly began, she wanted to ask a favor. "Could you possibly give us a small discount?" I chuckled softly, without a hint of malice or mockery, only with that cloying sweetness that leaves a bitter aftertaste. "I'm sorry, darling, there's no room for favors here. Only signed contracts. Would you like to book?" She nodded, swallowing her resentment with difficulty. "Excellent. Then, from this moment on, we'll start charging for what used to remain behind the scenes, for my value." From that day on, everything went smoothly. Olivia Rodriguez was extremely polite, almost obsequious. She bombarded me with messages, clarifying details, and in every word, I could sense that strained, fake smile that I hadn't noticed before. Ethan Bennett remained silent. He avoided my gaze, and I didn't push it. I relished how the silence began to weigh on them. Much more so than any words of mine ever could. They threw themselves headfirst into planning the celebration. A private reception in honor of Ethan Bennett's promotion, that was the official version. An evening full of guests, exquisite treats, and accolades for his career achievements. What irony! In the very place where I was once denied the right to even sit down, they were now going to flaunt achievements they never would have attained without my participation. But this time I was playing offense. I instructed the team to execute all the preparations flawlessly, but with one small caveat: to introduce subtle changes that would not escape their attention. I replaced the flowers chosen by Olivia Rodriguez with others. The wine she loved so much was nowhere to be found. The lighting was slightly warmer than she preferred, not critical enough to complain about openly, but enough to cause slight irritation. Then, as if by chance, I sent invitations to the most influential women in the city, businesswomen, gallery owners, high-ranking executives. I offered them exclusive access to the event as observers of the venue's new concept, and, intrigued, they accepted my invitation. They were captivated by this aura of mystery. They couldn't imagine that, in addition to a social inspection, they would witness an elegant and silent collapse. Everything was permeated with movement, with foreboding. The irony was that neither Ethan Bennett nor Olivia Rodriguez suspected that this evening was not a triumph but a cruel lesson. the long-awaited night arrived. The venue sparkled with the perfection of every detail, just as Olivia Rodriguez had dreamed, or almost. The floral arrangements were white, as she had ordered, but instead of exotic orchids, modest local lilies adorned the tables. No one noticed the substitution except her. I saw her eyebrows furrow at the entrance, but she remained silent. She had plenty of pride, but not a shred of patience. Ethan Bennett, glass in hand and a strained smile on his face, greeted the guests. Nervousness gripped him more tightly than he realized. I observed everything from my strategically chosen corner. A black silk shawl, once sewn for Miss Abigail Sterling, concealed me. No one recognized in me the very woman who. The hostess of the evening acted like a socialite, casually conversing with selected guests. At the height of the celebration, when the atmosphere was filled with ease, I asked for a projector to be brought in for something special. Olivia Rodriguez, assuming it was part of a surprise for Ethan Bennett, smirked smugly and headed towards the dance floor. But as soon as the video started, the triumph vanished from her face. Old photos of this place flashed on the screen, even before the renovation. And then, a shot, me, modestly perched at a table, like a shadow at the very wedding they had tried so desperately to erase from memory. A murmur rippled through the hall. No one understood what was happening until a headline flashed, revealing the truth: I am the one who had no place at the table. With my head held high, I walked to the center of the room, resolutely covering the distance, and took the microphone. Good evening, my voice echoed through the hall. I am Eleanor Thompson, the owner of this place, the hostess of this evening, and the mother of the man who is basking in the glory today, forgetting that his every success is built on my labor. On every line in the documents, on every dish served, on every penny paid. The hall fell into a deathly silence. For the first time, I saw Olivia Rodriguez speechless, not out of humility, but from undisguised fear. Fear of losing everything she had built on someone else's foundation. Her eyes reflected the horror of realizing that the house of cards of her success was about to collapse. My short performance was swallowed by silence. Not a single clap. It seemed people didn't understand if it was part of the act or a cruel truth that made them uncomfortable. I paused, allowing my words time to permeate the air. Then I spoke in an even voice, with the weariness of someone who had been silent for too long. I didn't come here to demand. I don't need your apologies or fake embraces. I just want to clarify. At my age, one no longer seeks applause, but peace. But sometimes that peace is found only when you sweep the dust off forgotten stories and walk through them. I saw faces change in the hall. Some lowered their eyes, embarrassed, others looked with undisguised respect. Ethan Bennett. Oh, Ethan Bennett seemed to shrink under my gaze. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with moisture. He tried to say something, but his voice trembled treacherously. Olivia Rodriguez, on the other hand, was silent, as if petrified. Every word I spoke seemed to shatter against the walls of her flawless world with a crystal chime. In this very venue, I was once denied even the right to a chair. Here I was hidden, as if I could spoil the perfect picture of their ideal world. And today this place is mine. And don't think it's out of revenge or greed. No. I just realized one simple truth: it's pointless to expect respect from those who deny your right to exist to your face. Dignity must be torn out by oneself, without hysterics and scandals, but in such a way that it becomes clear once and for all: you can't hide me anymore. I finished my speech, thanked everyone for their attention, and, without waiting for applause, headed into the hall. I didn't need ovations. They remained there, frozen, with glasses in their hands and with a burden of shame hanging on their shoulders. It was my victory. Quiet, without a single scream or fist pounding on the table. Simple presence. Presence as I had never been allowed to be before. The next morning, I received a message from Ethan Bennett. No mom, no hint of I'm sorry. Just a dry, we need to talk. I reread the message once, twice, and left it unanswered. Not because I craved revenge. I just had nothing more to say to him. When you give your whole life and receive only contempt in return, there comes a moment when silence is the only worthy answer. That same day, I called my accountant. I asked him to stop those monthly transfers that I had been automatically sending in Ethan Bennett's name from the account I had inherited from Miss Abigail Sterling. It was more of a habit than a duty. Stop everything, I said, and record the changes. No more obligations. He hesitated, but did so anyway. And, hanging up the phone, I felt a strange peace, as if I had lifted a heavy stone from my shoulders that had been pressing down on me for years. Then I went to the notary, rewrote my will, crossed out old names, tore up the old papers. Instead, I added a fund to support women artisans, to which I had once anonymously donated. They knew what to do with what I no longer needed. Women who had learned to sew between tears and silence. That night, I sat on the terrace of my house, holding a glass of wine, not to get drunk, but to complete this cycle. I looked at the glittering lights of the city, remembering every night spent waiting for a call, a visit, a sign that I had done the right thing by giving everything. And finally realized, the problem is not that I gave too much. The problem is that some never learned to accept without destroying the one who gave them everything. On an ordinary day, I went to a boutique located in a shopping center. I was thinking about a shawl suitable for a charity event in my hall. I entered calmly, with the self-assurance that comes with age, when you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. I headed towards the display window when I suddenly heard a voice familiar to pain, a voice that always found something to say about my clothes, food, manner of speaking. It was Olivia Rodriguez's mother. She was standing with her back to me and talking animatedly on the phone. Her sharp laughter, that signature sound with which she so skillfully humiliated, filled the space. She was talking about the shame they had to endure at the last event, about how Eleanor Thompson, the groom's mother, dared to rise above everyone just because she had money. For a few seconds, I stood rooted to the spot, not so much from rage as from curiosity. I was curious to see her face when she realized that she could no longer pull my strings as before. Slowly, with a barely perceptible smile, I approached. She turned around. For a split second, her face froze in a grimace of surprise and, perhaps, slight panic. The phone hung in my hand, the unfinished sentence suspended in the air. Eleanor Thompson. What a coincidence. I was just about to call you. She forced that signature fake smile, perfected to the point of being automatic. I met her gaze with an even, impenetrable expression, no hint of friendliness, no suggestion of hostility. And why were you going to call me? I asked bluntly. She nervously adjusted her silk scarf, as if trying to hide behind it, carefully choosing her words, as if weighing each one on apothecary scales. To apologize, of course. It was all a misunderstanding. I cut her off sharply, not letting her finish. No apologies necessary. Time has put everything in its place. I just wanted to remind you of one simple thing. Respect cannot be bought with money or obtained by right of birth. It is either given or it isn't. You chose not to give it. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. Embarrassment was evident in every movement. She reached out to me in a conciliatory gesture. I left her hand hanging in the air. I am no longer the Eleanor you knew at that wedding. Now I am a woman you didn't want to see. And I no longer need to be seen. I walked out of the store, holding my head high. Not out of a sense of victory, but because I had nothing left to lose. At that moment, I felt only one thing, a devastating freedom. 3 days later, the intercom rang. The doorman's voice sounded agitated. Eleanor Thompson, there's a young man here to see you. Says he's your son. Claims he urgently needs to talk to you and refuses to leave. I froze in silence, as if spellbound. No was about to burst from my lips, but something inside, like a magnet, pulled me to see him one last time. Not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, but to put an end to it, looking truth in the eye. I nodded to the doorman, letting him in. The wait in the living room stretched on endlessly, and the cup of hot tea in my hands seemed like the only anchor in a raging sea of emotions. When he walked in, I gasped. Standing before me was a stranger, haggard, with shadows of weariness on his face. But the eyes, they still held that familiar mischievous glint, the one that flashed whenever he came to borrow money, artfully masking his request under the guise of concern. "Mom, I know I've hurt you," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze, "but I'm sure you won't leave me in the lurch. We're family." "Let me speak," I interrupted him, feeling an icy calm growing inside. He, like a machine, began his usual song, about how he had stumbled, how he needed help, how Olivia Rodriguez had dumped him, how he had lost his job. It was all as predictable as the sunrise. "Mom, you could give me a chance, a little push to start all over again. I swear, this time it will be different." I chuckled softly. Not maliciously, not mockingly, but rather out of helplessness and bitter irony. It wasn't the first and probably wouldn't be the last of his new lives. He appeared, as always, laden with promises that crumbled into dust as soon as he was inside the house. I looked up at him, full of weariness. "Ethan Bennett, stop lying. No need for oaths. Just understand, I am no longer your crutch. Not your safety net. Not your personal emotional ATM." He froze, as if struck by lightning, his mouth agape with astonishment. He hadn't expected such sobering coldness. "Is that all I am to you?" he squeezed out. "No, Ethan Bennett, you are the son I raised, lavishing you with love, and you chose to trample that love, to spit in the face of the one who selflessly protected you. You are the man who didn't find a place for me at his wedding and now has crawled back to ask for a roof over his head." Tears welled up in his eyes. "So, you don't love me anymore?" I sighed wearily. "Love that is not cared for withers and dies." After that conversation, I naively assumed I wouldn't see him again. How wrong I was. A week later, an official letter arrived. From a law firm. Ethan Bennett had filed a lawsuit. It became absolutely clear, he was not seeking reconciliation. He was only interested in the financial aspect, and he intended to use my past as a stepping stone to enrichment. I responded through my lawyer, Ms. Abigail Sterling, a strict, meticulous woman who was perfectly aware of my story. I gave her all the necessary documents, the will, property records, and information about the years of emotional neglect that ultimately led me to sever all ties. The mediation attempt failed. Ethan Bennett was unable to substantiate his claims with evidence. A few days later, he sent me a long, rambling message in which pleas were interspersed with threats. "I will never forgive you if you leave me like this," read the last sentence. I reread it twice and deleted it. That night, I opened the box where I kept old photographs. I found one where he was only 8 years old, he's hugging me around the neck, and on his face is a smile full of innocence. I gently ran my fingers over the image. For a few seconds, sadness washed over me. Then, I carefully placed the photograph back where it belonged. I didn't tear it up, but I no longer felt the nostalgia that used to tear me apart. Finally, I understood that there is a kind of love that doesn't die, but simply goes deep into the earth, buried under layers of time and disappointment. A month later, I received a registered letter with an invitation. Distant relatives were planning a family gathering, supposedly to reconnect. I knew Ethan Bennett would be there. I knew it was a disguised attempt to ambush me emotionally. Yet, I decided to go, not for them, but for myself. I wanted to put an end to this story where it began, in front of those who still naively believed they could manipulate me. I dressed slowly. Linen trousers, a white blouse, and a light coat. No jewelry, no brands, no ostentation. Just me. I arrived on time. When I walked in, all conversation ceased. Some greeted me with surprise, others with a guilty look. Ethan Bennett stood at the far end of the room, talking to an aunt who barely acknowledged me when I was a widowed seamstress. He saw me, but didn't approach. During dinner, a toast was proposed. One of the older cousins said in a trembling voice that the family should heal old wounds. Everyone nodded, as if soft words could erase years of contempt. Then, they asked me to say something. I calmly stood up and spoke. For years, I swallowed humiliation, naively believing it was part of love. But enough. I didn't come to forgive, I came to say goodbye. I realized that family isn't those who share your blood, but those who honor your hands. Today, I close this chapter not with hatred, but with firmness in my heart. I am no longer the Eleanor Thompson who begged for a place. Today, I am Eleanor Thompson who created it herself. Silence hung in the room. No applause, no words. I headed for the door, grabbed my bag, and left. I had no desire to look back. Already in the car, in the parking lot, I felt something inside me release. A weight, a knot, a chain, whatever it was, it no longer existed. Finally, I found peace. Not with them, but with myself. Days went by, and with them, the noise faded away. There were no more calls. No letters, no messages, no claims. The silence that used to hurt me now seemed like a priceless gift. I lived without explanations, without justifying my decisions, without carrying the guilt they had placed on me like labels. One day, I visited the notary for the last time. I registered my name as a trademark for my establishment, not out of vanity, but to emphasize that everything I have is the fruit of my own efforts. Not something I inherited, but something I overcame. Then I sat down at a street cafe. I ordered my favorite drink, opened a book, and allowed myself to smile. No one recognized me, no one pointed, and I liked it that way. I turned my establishment into something more than just an event center in the middle of the city. Now it was also a haven for elderly women forgotten by their families. I give them space, work, and a little dignity. Sometimes they tell me their stories, many of which are similar to mine, others surpass it, but all have something in common. They were invisible until they decided to stop being so. I no longer wait for calls from Ethan Bennett. I don't want to know if he's okay or if he's learned his lesson. It's no longer my concern. I saved myself in my own way, in my own time, without cheap revenge, without shouting, only with firmness, with elegance, with the love you give yourself when you realize that you don't need to beg anyone. Today, I have found peace. Not because everything turned out for the best, but because I am no longer disturbed by what went wrong. And if someone asks me who I am, I will not say mother, or seamstress, or owner. I will only say what really matters. I am Eleanor Thompson, and now I finally belong to myself.